Hello and welcome back to another episode of Low Spec Labs. We're in chapter 6 of Sander Van Vaughts RHCSA EX200. This chapter covers user and group management. Let's go ahead and get started. Like always, we're going to have past Steven handing things off to explain subjects and present Steven kind of merging things together. I feel like that's a good format here. Let's go ahead and get started. I hope you guys hit subscribe. As I'm working on these videos, you'll notice I release YouTube shorts, which basically condense different segments of these videos down into less than 60 seconds. I feel like it's a good way to get kind of a little information dump there. So please subscribe for those, comment on those, and let me know what you think. Otherwise, let's continue. As a Linux admin, managing users and groups are going to be very important to your skill set. There are two utilities that you should probably know off the bat. Those utilities are sudo and su. Past Steven, please handle sudo and su. Let's talk about the sudo and su commands. Sudo stands for super user do and su stands for switch users. These two commands are essential to managing Linux servers. You're definitely going to want to know how to become an administrator, and you're definitely going to want to know how to switch user contexts. In the next couple videos, we'll dive deeper into these two commands, as well as managing user permissions, creating new users, and much, much more. This is going to be a fun chapter with lots of lab boys. Let's dive deep. Now that we know what sudo and su are, let's practice actually using the su command to switch users. Past Steven, take it from here, bro. This is lab 6-1, working with sudo, su, and managing users. Let's get started. The very first thing they want you to do is go ahead and log in. So if you haven't done that already, please do. There are two commands we can use to figure out which user we are in a Linux shell. The first is who am I? The second command is ID. As you can see, we're the user LSL. To switch users, we use the su command. If we wanted to switch to root, we would do su dash. It would then ask us for our root account password. We enter that, and we are now root. You can tell we're root because our account name changed right here, but we can also run a who am I. As you can see, we're root. What if we want to create a new user? That is what the user add command is for. To create a new user called Bob, we would do user add Bob. And then we can switch to that user. So we can do su Bob. And then when we run a who am I, you can see we're now that user Bob. So now that we know how to make a user, it would be nice if we could turn that user into administrator. Don't worry, gentlemen, I have all the answers. We last left off creating the user Bob. What if we wanted to make Bob an admin? Well, there's two things we're going to need. The first being we have to add Bob to the wheel group. The second would be defining what admin privileges we want Bob to have. We would do that by editing the etc sudoers file. Let's do that right now. Oh, last but not least, I almost forgot, so make that three things. We're going to want a password on that admin account. You generally don't want admin accounts to run without passwords on them. So the first thing we do is a passwd Bob, and it's going to prompt us to enter a new password for Bob. So let's do that. Then after that, we're going to want to do usermod -a to append, G for group, wheel, and then we enter our user. Cool, and we just added the user Bob to our wheel user group. Last but not least, we have to edit our sudoers file. We do that using vsudo. So we do vsudo, and we scroll down, and the main thing we want to do is make sure this account does not have permissions to change our root password. To do that, we do Bob. To do that, we do Bob all equals !user bin passwd root. So basically it prevents us from changing the password as an admin. Right, so we have admin permissions on everything else except passwd on the root account. And then we hit escape, WQ exclamation mark to save, and that's it. Now, when we switch to Bob, we should be able to run the sudo command. So let's do su bob. Now that we're Bob, we can do a quick sudo command to confirm our permissions. So we do sudo vi/etc passwd. And as you can see, we open VI as an admin with no problem. So we hit escape, Q, and there we go. That's how you become an administrator on Linux. Now that we've learned how to use su and sudo, let's walk through a lab exercise to confirm we know what we're talking about. Past Steven has already done this. I hope you guys are keeping up. We're moving very fast here, boys. Now, let's talk about lab exercise 6-2. This is another lab that walks through creating users. This is a pretty simple one. It's basically a repeat of a couple of videos ago. Let's get started. Steps 1 and 2 of this lab are to log in, which I've already done, and then elevate to a root shell. So to do that, we do su-, and we enter our password. After that, we have to create 2 users, Amy and Betty. So we do user add Amy, user add Betty. We then have to set the password for Amy and Betty. We can do that using one long chain command. Echo password pipe passwd -- stand in Betty. Then we repeat the same thing for Amy. Cool. So we just set the password for both Amy and Betty in one line. Now let's switch to Betty and try to run some commands. And we are now logged in as Betty because we did an su Betty. And then from there, we can run an ls/root. And you see we don't have permissions. What happens when we try to do it as an administrator? You see it doesn't accept the password because, again, this is not an admin. So that leaves the question, how do we make Betty an admin? Well, that's simple. First things first, we do echo Betty all equals, so that's that same command from before, but there's going to be a few changes. So we give her access to all, and then we close it, and then we want to append this to /etc sudoers.d, and then we want to make a file for her called Betty. And with that, we just made her an admin. We then switch back to Betty's account and confirm we can run sudo. So we do su Betty, and then we can do sudo ls/root, and we should now have access after we enter the password for her. And look at that, we now have permissions. Now that Betty's an admin, we can use her account to make Amy administrator, and we're going to limit the admin permissions on Amy. The reason we're doing this is because, well, users should not be able to mess with each other's permissions, and we're going to limit Amy's admin permissions to root and to Betty. To do that, I've already created a file in our sudoers file, so we do ls, have to be sudo ls/etc sudoers.d. You'll see we have a file called Amy. Then we can echo the permissions we want into that file for Amy, and Amy will then have the right admin permissions. So this command probably looks like French to you. Let's break it down. Basically, we ran sudo, and then we ran shell echo, and we had to do that to pass this through echo, right? And we ran echo, and we echoed through Amy all, and we gave Amy permissions to user add and passwd, but we explicitly blocked passwd access to it should have been Betty, and I put Amy in there twice. But basically what we did there was to limit the admin permissions on Amy so that it doesn't have the ability to reset the root or the Betty password, or at least it shouldn't have if I had put Betty instead of Amy. So make sure you put the right accounts in. Now let's learn how to use the passwd command. Go ahead and take it from here. Pass Steven. Oh, Pass Steven's handling passwd. Ooh. So we have our Linux host pulled up here, and we've ran a tail on the etc passwd file. Let's talk about the etc passwd file and what all these different fields mean. If you recall, The etc passwd file contains information about users, like your password. How do I read this file? Well, it's pretty straightforward actually. etc passwd is very human readable. The very first field in etc passwd is your root or login name. Each field in the passwd file is delimited by a colon, so a colon defines the end of that field. The next field is your password. In older versions of Linux, this used to be kept as a clear text hash. Nowadays, it's just an X because it's encrypted and stored somewhere else. The field after your password is your user ID. The field after that password is your default group ID. The field after your group ID is a comment field. So if you had some information about this user you wanted to put in there, you would put it in that field. After that, it shows you where your home directory is, and then it shows you your login shell. So the default shell it chooses for that user when that user account starts. Hello. In our last video, we talked about the etc passwd file and how it held information about our users. There is another file called etc shadow that holds information about our users' passwords. That's right, the password info is kept in a different file than your user info. This is very convenient because it means someone can't just get access to your passwords by reading that etc passwd file. Yet it's also annoying because now you have another file to check when you're looking at issues and trying to figure out why things won't work. So now let's talk about etc shadow and see what the fields in that file mean. So I ran a tail on etc shadow as an administrator, and it gave us a result. As we can see, we have our LSL account there. Let's break down what these fields mean. The first one is, of course, your username. The next one is your encrypted password. After that, it's the days since epoch, since the password was changed. On Linux systems, epoch is January 1st, 1970. So days since that date, since the password is changed. The field after epoch defines how many days the password must maintain the same before you're allowed to change it. You could view it as a type of mandatory minimum password age, so the password must be at least 90 days old before you can change it. The next field could be considered a mandatory maximum on the password age. How old can the password be before you have to change it? The third to last field is configured so that it'll give you a warning before your password expires. The second to last field defines how long a user can go without logging into the Linux system before their account is disabled. And the last field defines the number of days since the account was locked. Ooh, that was a long one, boys. If I've kept your attention for this long, congratulations. Thank you for paying attention. Please go ahead and tune back in to the next episode where we discuss more information about Linux users and groups. This is going to be a very detailed chapter. Now that we know where our configuration files for our users are, it would be convenient if we knew how to modify those. Fortunately, we don't have to manually modify them. There's two commands for that, user add and user mod. Let's dive deeper into those commands. Now that we know where our user configuration files are at, we should probably know how to make users and modify them. Thankfully, we don't actually have to touch those two files. And it's actually advised that you don't, because a simple mistake in etc passwd can actually prevent your entire computer from booting or prevent you from logging in. So don't actually modify them unless absolutely necessary, and double check your spelling when and if you have to. Before we continue, we should learn about a file. So when you create a user, the user's configuration is pulled from a file called etc default user add. When we use the user add command, it's actually pulling the configuration for the user from that file. What if I want to modify my user's properties, stuff like preventing login and changing its shell? Well, to do that, we would use the user mod command. Let's walk through an example of user mod. A few videos ago, we created the user Betty. Let's change her shell to bash instead of the default sh shell. We would do user mod --shell / bin bash Betty. So it seems Betty's default shell is already bash. So let's change her shell from bash to sh. There we go. And that's how you add and modify users. More to come. That's what she said. Let's talk about the change command. The change command can also be used to change user properties. It's not actually change, so correction there before we even get started. So we know how to create users and modify user properties. It would be convenient if we could change the user password. Well, there's a tool for that. On Linux, there's two tools you use to change user passwords. The first tool is passwd, which we've used before. The second tool is change. Why would you want to use the change command? Well, the change command is interactive and actually makes things a little bit easier to use compared to passwd, where you kind of have to know the flags and get very comfy with it. So I've been saying change when the command is change -l, and then we point it at a user to get its user info. As you can see, it shows us the last password change. The password never expires, password is never inactive, the account never expires, and it gives us a lot of information. Let's set an expiration date on Betty. To do that, we would do change-e for expires, and then we set our date, and then we set our user, which is again Betty. And then we can run change-l Betty one more time, and as you can see, we now have an expiration date on that account. So we just learned how to modify files using passwd and change, and we learned where the user property files are a couple minutes before that. Let's put it all together in a lab so we can confirm we know what we're talking about. This is a fun one, boys. This is lab 6-3, creating user accounts. It combines all the concepts we just went over in the past couple videos. Step 1, log into your Linux host and elevate to a root shell. As you can see, we are already root right here. After that, we're going to go ahead and edit /etc login.defs. Once we have etc login.defs open, we'll search for pass. We're going to change pass maximum days from 9999 insert to 99 escape WQ. After that, we have to go back into login.defs and make sure that the create home flag is set to yes, which it is. So we can go ahead and quit. Cool. Now we have to cd into /etc. Then we make their photos files. Then we have to edit our bash rc. Go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of bash rc. And what you want to do is add a line. And that line is going to be export editor equals /user bin. Then of course we save it, and there we go. We now need to confirm the changes we just made. To do that, we do a user add test. We then do an ID test, and as you can see, we now have a user called test with the appropriate groups. We then have to set a password on that account. To do that, we use the passwd command. And then we set a password, and there we go. So let's break this command down. What are we doing? So we're setting password policy settings on the test account. The first thing we're doing is we're allowing users to change their password within 30 days of the expiration date. We're giving them 3 warnings to change their password before they're forced to change it. And then we're giving them a password reset every 90 days. Last but not least, we're going to grep our user config files. Last but not least, we're going to grep our user config files for test and confirm that that information is there. So we were going to do grep test /etc profile. So now we're going to grep a few config files to confirm our test user is there. So to do that, we do grep test etc passwd, etc shadow, and etc group. And as you can see, the user test now exists in all 3 of those file locations. Last but not least, let's talk about Linux groups. Once we get through this, we have one more lab to do. Let's talk about Linux groups. So on Linux, there are 2 types of groups. There are primary groups and there are secondary groups. Every user on Linux is part of a primary group, and every user on Linux can be part of one or more secondary group. Let's dive deep into creating and managing groups. If you recall from a few videos ago, our etc passwd file holds user information. That's where we also get group information, right? So it shows us what user, it shows us the user ID and the group ID for the user. Group information for the group is held in etc group. Let's cat that file. So you can see it has different information about the different groups on the system. What if we wanted to add a Linux group? Well, to add a Linux group, we would do group add, and then we'll call this group test. Looks like we already have a group named test. We'll call this test 1. This is lab 6-4, working with Linux groups. Let's go ahead and get started. Step 1, go ahead and log into your Linux shell and elevate yourself to the root account. I've already done that. We then have to add 2 groups. We're gonna add sales, and then we're gonna add accounting. And there we go. A few videos ago, we made a account called test. Let's do this. Let's add the test account to the sales group. So we can do, to do that, we use usermod-a capital G for secondary group, then enter sales for the user test. And we could do the same thing and also put test in accounting. And there we go. After that, we do an ID test. And as you can see, test is now part of the sales and accounting groups. If you've made it this far, I would like to thank you for watching. 20 minutes is a long time. That is a heavy demand on anybody's attention span. Hopefully you enjoyed the content. I hope you're not wasting your time and your precious life watching stuff you don't enjoy. Who does that? I hope not you. I hope that when you watch this, you get both educational and informative content, and that it's fun for you guys. I try to keep things lighthearted over here. It's pretty dry topics, so we got to do some things to spice it up. Go ahead and hit the like, comment, and subscribe button, and tune in. We should be dropping more of these series as I finish more of the RHCSA book, and then from there, there's an Ansible book I want to pick up. All right, before I pick up Ansible, I need to learn the foundation and fundamentals of Linux systems. So we'll start here. Next, we'll go to Ansible, and then after that, we might end up going to Terraform and some other DevOps stuff. So more to come.